Welcome, dear learners, to this lesson on folk tales and short stories in climate literature. We discussed several stories last time, and we were talking about how mythology and folk tales, they carry ancient wisdom and which can be used in modern times also. So this part of climate literature is very significant because when we look at our local resources, when we see the farmers and the localities in our country, in India, then we know that they are rich in knowledge about the land and the environment, and they have been through a lot of ups and downs and invasions and uprooting of their cultures. So let's look at some more such myths and folk tales. So here is the story of the river dolphin and crocodile. So Tulika De, in her paper Folk Tales of Northeast India, a relook for environmental studies classroom transaction, makes mention of the importance of folk tales in everyday life in the Northeast. This folk tale, River Dolphin and Crocodile, is about the conservation of wildlife such as river dolphins and crocodiles. As we already know today that dolphins and crocodiles are all endangered species, and there needs to be some understanding, there should be some education for modern people to teach them to conserve these animals and these creatures of biodiversity. It reminds me of one example that in villages there is so much of illiteracy. So at times that whenever people see a snake or see a leopard or a wolf, they are ready to kill it. So this comes from ignorance, and this shows that there is a break from ancient traditions of the land, and it needs to be awoken again. That love for the land, that understanding, that wisdom should be opened up, and people should know about it. The modern world should also know about it. So this story is one such story. It's about lovers who jump in the river Subansiri. So the girl jumps into the river because she is going to be married to somebody whom she does not like, she does not know, and she is afraid of bringing disrepute to her family. She jumps into the river and she realizes that she can swim. So she ties a pestle to her body so that she may sink to the bottom of the river. When she sinks to the bottom of the river, she turns into a dolphin. When her lover hears about her jumping into the river, he is maddened by grief. He also ties a stone to his back and jumps into the river. And he also puts some thorns all over his body. So when he goes to the bottom of the river, he changes into a crocodile. So that is why Mishing people of Assam never kill a dolphin or a crocodile. There is a sense that they would be hurting humans by killing them. So we can understand the context of this story, understanding that animals and birds, the other living beings, they are connected with human beings, and their life is just as precious as the life of human beings, and so it needs to be conserved. There was another story also that was also about these dolphins, and the punishment for killing dolphins was that they were taken into the water, and they were made to heal the injured dolphins, and then they were warned never to kill a dolphin again and to treat dolphins in a way equal to the way we treat human beings. So a lot of environmental philosophies, when we talk about even deep ecology, they talk about this realizing the oneness of the universe, realizing that we are connected with everything else, and we are not superior in any way to the other living beings on this planet. Then there's another interesting folk tale from Nagaland titled The Story of Raja Mircha. Mircha, you know, is red chili. A man called Panmei was very hungry, and he was going through the forest looking for food when he saw the Naga king chili plant, and he ate the chili. So his whole body was on fire and he was rolling in pain as a result of consuming that chili. And then the Roga bird flew over him and dropped a bunch of paddy on him. When he chewed the grains of paddy, he was miraculously cured. Thus began the cultivation of paddy and Naga king chili, and people in the Panmei clan are forbidden to kill or eat the Roigo bird. Till this day, the Panmei clan of Ziliangrong Naga tribe observe this practice. This was taken by the author from Mr. Akhan Kamai, Nagaland. So in this also, see how these folk tales, they become essential traditions, and how these folk tales teach people to respect the land, and they create prosperity also. And there is this bird called the Roigo bird. They are forbidden to kill that bird. So even today, the clan practices this tradition. So there was a shift in themes post 20th century. As the 20th century progressed, society faced rapid industrialization, urbanization, and the onset of environmental degradation, sparking increased awareness of human impact on the planet. This shift in cultural consciousness is reflected in the changing themes of short fiction, where authors began to adopt a more urgent and direct approach to environmental concerns. So we can see this is extremely interesting, the reflection from old stories, old folk tales. We can see, we can contrast the old folk tales and modern storytelling, how modern storytelling borrows from these folk tales. As it is said that no literature is original. When we talk about Anglo-Saxon times, we find that modern literature, postmodern literature has borrowed so many themes, images and symbols from that literature. Earlier human beings were basically agricultural. So there's a lot of imagery and a lot of beliefs and ideas and metaphors that are taken up with modern literature. And interestingly enough, when we talk about the Marvel universe, when we talk about Thor, and all those images are there in Anglo-Saxon poetry. So modern is not necessarily absolutely new. In fact, in a certain book on Anglo-Saxon culture, it was revealed that the hammer of Thor was found in one of the graves of the Anglo-Saxon people. So you can see how that Thor's hammer has become so magical in the fantastic films made by the Marvel universe. So this is the thing. Short story or story writing may have been getting different contents and being more urgently concerned with climate change, but some of the images and some of the early metaphors still remain there. So, direct environmental awareness and eco-criticism. Direct environmental awareness and eco-criticism. Post-20th century short stories often contain explicit environmental themes, moving away from mere survival tales to stories that examine humanity's responsibility towards the environment. So, what is the modern writing of short stories like in the 20th century? There are no more stories of survival or stories of just describing encounters with nature, as we saw in the Jungle Book. They move beyond that and they talk about humanity's responsibility towards the environment. These stories grew reflective of ecological activism, questioning human consumption, pollution, habitat destruction, and climate change itself. So, earlier on, also, I mentioned uh, climate story when we are discussing climate fiction about these environmentalists who were trying to save a female owl. So, the focus is on conservation in this modern story. Anthropocene themes. Many post 20th century writers focused on the Anthropocene, where human influence shapes environmental and ecological outcomes. Short stories by writers like Margaret Atwood and Barbara Kingsolver look at the effect of humans on biodiversity, pollution, and global warming. Their works underscore the interconnectedness of human life and the environment, warning of the fragile balance at risk in our current age. So, all their stories tell us the same thing, that all life in the universe, on the planet, is interconnected, and if we abuse it, if we exploit it, then we are risking a grave future ahead of us. This thematic shift reflects how literary fiction became a platform for environmental advocacy, blending fiction with social criticism to appeal to readers' consciences. So, short story by its very nature is different from a novel or a play. It has to be concise and very focused. So, here the focus is on the Anthropocene in the stories of Kingsolver and Atwood. The focus is of the human activity of the Anthropocene on nature and the undesirable outcomes. Social and cultural environmentalism. In addition to dystopian and apocalyptic themes, many contemporary authors began incorporating cultural and social aspects of environmentalism. So, as we discuss later, that climate change impacts are impacting every part of our life. So, every discipline that is studied by human beings is connected with climate change. We discussed this earlier, whether it is political science or philosophy or maths or history or art, all are connected with climate, and therefore contemporary authors uh, have started incorporating cultural and social aspects of environmentalism too. They focus on how marginalized communities are often disproportionately affected by ecological disasters. So, when one talks about the cultural and social aspects, one looks at other issues related to climate impacts such as poverty and the inequality between people, and how there's a difference of impact on the developed countries and the developing countries, and there's differences in economy and difference in globalization. Sometimes it so happens that the affluent countries have already reached a stage where they decide certain things are not good for their health, for example, tobacco and cigarettes. So the companies involved in this have to get their investments from somewhere. So these things start being sold in developing countries or third world countries, where this knowledge of climate change and climate impacts on health are not so widespread. So it's quite an ironical fact when we think about ancient wisdom of leading a healthy life, of having fresh air, of having exercise, eating food directly from the sources, from the environment, eating unprocessed food. All those things were accepted as part of daily life. And after imperialism, the outcome of post-colonialism, people's habits were changed in these third world countries or in these colonized countries. They accepted the industrialized fare offered by the colonizer, and thus their cultural attitudes to food and living started changing, and it became considered as a high life. But it was not a high life. Moving away from nature was never a high life. It resulted in all kinds of diseases and deficiencies in their bodies. We see so many differences in even the body systems of people in different countries, where darker skinned people are more protected from the sun's ultraviolet rays, and lighter skinned people are not so well protected. So if when we talk about the boosting the sale of UV protection creams and all, it is something that is quite unsuitable, or it does not fit with our society. But we have been moving away from our cultural and our traditional system, so we accept that, and because it seems that it is all a very high kind of life. So now these stories are focusing on marginalized communities and how they are impacted by ecological disasters, both direct and indirect. So it is a very complex mix of effects, how even post-colonialism has worsened the climate impacts on populations that were colonized. Leslie Marmon Silko and Linda Hogan. The short stories of Leslie Marmon Silko and Linda Hogan often blend Native American cultural beliefs with environmental themes, emphasizing the harmony between humanity and nature that indigenous cultures have long upheld. So I just talked about indigenous cultures. I talked about the traditions, the ways of life, which led to good health, which led to long lives, which kept the people active for a long time, which kept their minds and bodies in good shape for a long period of time. And that very culture of that very indigenous culture and those traditions are getting lost today. So these writers belonging to the Native American backgrounds write on Native American cultural beliefs, And these beliefs are very important because they talk about harmony between humanity and nature. And we know that the coming of the white man, whether it was in Australia or India or Canada or America, they made every possible attempt to wipe out those local and indigenous cultures. And those cultures bound the people to the land. They were so important. Uh, it was when these cultures were lost, when these people were killed, when their relationship was destroyed, that they began suffering the impacts of climate and various other things. So narratives in these stories by Marmon, Silko and Hogan, there are about Native Indian, Native American cultural beliefs. Such narratives, they critique modern environmental practices, highlighting the knowledge and traditions of indigenous communities as a potential source of sustainable living. So there are many ways and uh, many ideas that they have about living a sustainable life, about conserving the land, about not creating a huge carbon footprint. Climate change is a central theme, as concerns about global warming and rising sea levels and extreme weather events became more and more pronounced. Contemporary short stories began addressing climate change directly. This shift shows how short fiction has become an urgent voice in the fight for environmental awareness, urging readers to consider the immediate and future impacts of climate change on daily life, society, and ecosystems. So, all those who are writing these climate short stories, they focus on areas that have not been focused before. They focus on uh, daily lives, on routines of daily life or events of daily lives that are impacted by climate change. And they talk about ecosystems and they talk about society. And thus, when we talk about a short story, it is more focused and much more intense in the moment than a long novel or any other genre. Other recent short stories are imagining climate futures. They are tackling climate change directly, often portraying its effects on future societies and speculating about the long term outcomes of current inaction. These stories provide visceral and often alarming images of potential future realities. So, when we think of a short story, it is condensed, the moment is condensed, the insecurity and the mood is condensed. That's why the images in short stories can be very sharp and very alarming. And we also know a short story takes less time to read, a novel takes longer. So there are many people who want to spend their time reading something short because they are short of time. So in this way, a short story works very well to talk about pressing climate issues. If we distinguish it with a novel would take more time to read. And in this way, we have this category of very short fiction also, flash fiction also. So there's a variety of flash fiction out there. So when flash fiction, which is fiction that is of 500 words, or then we maybe 700 words, it makes the idea more compact and it tries to drive home the fact that climate impact is urgent and it should be urgently addressed. So Paolo Bacigalupi, in his story The Tamarisk Hunter, explores a future drought-stricken American West where water is a controlled commodity. So we already know in these post-apocalyptic films and novels, there is this thing of resource depletion, and then certain people try to control it and hold it, for their own benefit. So here in this drought-stricken American West, water is a controlled commodity. By drawing attention to extreme climate events in such stories, authors prompt readers to engage with climate change as an immediate threat rather than a distant issue. So, in India too, when we read short stories that are set in drought ridden regions of Rajasthan, maybe we come across this thing that where the certain aristocratic families, they hold on to the important resources such as wood and fuel and water. So this is a unhappy outcome of climate impacts. When there's resource depletion, then it leads to a kind of corruption and a chaos in which the strongest survive and they take control of the resources. So it becomes a chaotic world where one struggles for survival. And this story, The Tamarisk Hunter, talks about how water is a controlled commodity, which is one of the outcomes of climate impact and climate altered lands. So other stories also deal with the psychological and emotional impacts of climate change. Recent short stories also delve into the psychological and emotional impacts of climate change, often portraying characters struggling with ecological grief, loss, and the ethical burden of environmental awareness. So, there are stories which also talk about the psychological and emotional loss, the grief of losing one's land, and as we discussed deep ecology in an earlier lesson, I referred to it. We'll go deep into it later. There is an ecological self according to deep ecology, and that is one's severance from the land. One's self is created by the attachment with the land, with belonging to a land. And when there is a loss, when it is ruined, destroyed, taken away, there is grief, anxiety, there is psychological and emotional trauma. And so many populations suffer that. Indigenous populations are suffering this kind of grief today. Sometimes a dam is being built and people are dislocated, they lose their land, they are accommodated somewhere else, and that ecological self is shattered. They cannot accept this other place as theirs. This is not their land, this is not their self. They see the reflection of their self in their land. In the same way, in America, there are indigenous populations still, and the building of a gas pipeline has created issues at places where people have started to protest. So, binding up rivers, building dams, dislocating people, all these lead to ecological grief, and there's an ethical burden of environmental awareness, and the bond with the land is very deep, and there is a burden on their souls. Such themes are very effective in short fiction, which allows authors to focus on intimate personal narratives. So, as a short story is focused, concise, so such themes of grief and loss are better dealt with in short stories. So, authors like Amitav Ghosh and Claire Y. Watkins create characters who feel overwhelmed, guilty, and hopeless about environmental destruction, mirroring the real life experiences of many individuals who feel powerless in the face of global crisis. So, this kind of upheaval is taken up by stories by Amitav Ghosh and Claire Watkins about displaced people who lose their lands and who are powerless before these global climate crises. Role of this kind of fiction in representing climate issues. Climate fiction has become a crucial medium for representing climate change as it provides both a narrative and emotional dimension to what are often complex, data heavy scientific discussions. So, a short story is brief, sometimes momentary, focused on a moment or a situation or a mood. So, it can deal with just one dimension of climate change and can pick out just one part of heavy scientific data to bring into the story. Through fictional storytelling, authors can personalize climate issues, embedding them with relatable characters, vivid settings, and engaging plots that bring urgency and empathy to the climate conversation. So they bring empathy and sympathy to the climate conversation, and we talk about so many philosophers and theorists, and they all are unanimous in this that human beings have a connection with the land, and the empathy and the sympathy and the love for the land is something that makes human beings whole, makes them spiritually evolved and complete. And when they lose out of that connection with the land, they are losers. When we talk about modern times, when we talk about people living in high rises where they are not in touch with outside environment, they are in artificial temperatures, they lose out something that is very vital for the human body, because the human body is formed of all those chemicals and minerals that are out there on the earth. So how in the world can a person feel complete and happy if he is put in a plastic or concrete structure for days on and continuously under artificial lights, artificial artificially controlled temperature, and there is bound to be a lot of health issues, both related to mind and body. I did mention in an earlier lesson about a certain person in America. A documentary was made on him, and he was suffering from incurable depression, and he had tried all the possible cures for that, and he eventually managed to find the correct cure in the lap of nature, in the jungles of Mexico, where he met a shaman or a natural healer, and that's where he got cured. So, the simple story here is that nature itself has a healing influence. The connection with nature gives one wholeness and completeness, and staying away from it leads to a lot of problems. And we are even worse than that, worse than staying away. We are damaging and destroying the very house in which we live. So I'll stop here. We'll continue next time. I hope I was able to communicate something about the contribution of the short stories on climate towards mitigating climate change. Thank you.